Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. My name is Bob Green. I'm a music minister here at First Presbyterian Church, and I want to welcome you to a very special event. A couple of housekeeping things. First of all, make sure you know that these things are silenced, or as Harry Scanlon used to say, set to stun. And if you need to use the restroom facilities, you may exit by this door to my left, and both are down the hallway, one on the right and one on the left. And so I've been asked to give a few brief remarks, and it's really an awesome responsibility because, you know, what can you say about Gary Stewart? You know, the man was, let's face it, an institution, not only here in Bristol, but throughout the Tri-Cities. I met Gary when my family moved here in the mid-90s. He was the most gracious person I have ever met. We sang in concert choir together under Chick Davis, and then I got to know him as a piano tuner, and over the years, his help to me when I was tuning pianos, he was always that person I could call whenever I would get stuck. You know, what do I do about this? And there's always Gary. And so when I heard that, you know, Gary was not working anymore, my very first reaction was, well, what am I going to do now? And when I get stuck, who do I call? Because, I mean, Gary was always the one who was there, always had very, very good advice, and I knew him very much. Had the privilege of worshiping with him for 9 years at State Street United Methodist Church. He was in the choir there. He played brass in the ensemble there under Bill Thomas. So, I mean, just a very, very special person. You couldn't go anywhere in the Tri-Cities and open up a piano lid and not see one of his cards in front, you know, inside the piano. He had tuned every single piano in the entire Tri-Cities area. I'm convinced of it. There wasn't a piano he didn't know about. But, you know, he had a gift with people, and not just with, you know, restoring pianos. There's a piano in the balcony, which was one that he restored, that was gifted to this church a few years ago. And so his talents were many. So thanks again for coming today. And that's all I'm going to say at this point. I guess other people will be saying a few words here and there. We do not have an intermission in the program, which is why I mentioned the rooms down the hall. So feel free if you know, at some point, find a place between performances. And what was I going to mention? We have some players from the State Line Wind Symphony. That was one of the things, he was the fellow who told me about that organization. They're coming up on their 10-year anniversary of that organization. It's a concert band that meets in John Battle High School, and we perform 2 or 3 times a year. And he was very involved in that from the very beginning, and he was the one that got me involved in that as well. So thank you again for coming. And this is a concert. This is not a memorial service. It's a celebration of life. I want you to applaud, and applaud heartily, especially for our first performers. So thank you again.
And this is a blessed occasion. Thank you so much for being here to honor Gary. And let's honor also Jerry for all of her work.
On behalf of the family, I too would like to thank you for taking the time and the sharing of your talents this afternoon in the celebration of life for Gary Stewart. He would have been overwhelmed and humbled by this program. I thought, in addition to what Bob shared, I would take a brief moment to mention a couple of things about Gary that might give those of you that may not have known him some insight into just how good a person he really was. My name is Brian Wilson, not to be confused with the Beach Boy. Gary seemed to enjoy that from time to time, and Gary loved the Beach Boy music, by the way, in addition to what we have here today. He loved all kinds, but I minister music at Piney Flats First Baptist Church, but I also tune and work on pianos all over the place and do a lot to Gary. About 25 years ago, I was Gary's first employee outside of his parents working with him at the Piano Warehouse near the interstate in Blumpville. I had not been working with Gary for very long when I began to realize his incredible gift for working on pianos, along with the passion he had for the instrument. Just very gifted. I also realized just what a special individual Gary was. He loved life, his church, and his family. He also loved to laugh, share a joke every now and then, and occasionally a prank or two. I had not been with him very long when the word had got out about how good he was on working on pianos. Someone had sent him a grand to restore, and we tore it all the way down, as we always would. And when we got near the end of that, in that process, he had asked me to restring that piano. And I don't know how many of you all have had the opportunity to do that, but this particular grand, the plate fit really tight inside of that case of that piano. So it would pop and creak just like walking through an old haunted house, if you would. And so I started stringing that piano, and I was a little stressed out with it, needless to say, because on a piano, you go from 0 pounds of pressure to several tons of pressure in a short amount of time. Well, Gary and Ralph, his dad, one day just thought they'd play a little prank on me, and I was already stressed out stringing this piano. So they filled up a big old paper bag full of air and walked up behind me and just popped that thing. And I'm just telling the truth. I nearly lost a couple of body functions right there and during that moment. And Gary laughed and laughed about that not for days, but for years to come. And I reminded him of that not long, actually, before he passed one day. We were talking. He just smiled from ear to ear. But Gary loved to laugh. And due to our time, I've just condensed 3 things that I learned from Gary that not only apply to pianos, but also to life. Again, I'll be brief. Number 1, no matter if I tune a piano on the side of a hill somewhere up here in Grundy, Virginia, or for an accomplished artist at one of the universities, I need to do my very best. Gary would often remind me that you never know who may stop by to play that instrument. Always do the very best you can with what you have. Number 2, your professionalism is known in the details. Chuck Swindoll, a popular preacher, as many of you know, quoted, "The difference between something good and something great is attention to detail." That would sum Gary up when working on pianos. I could not begin to tell you how many times I would be working on a piano with Gary, thinking we would have things already resolved and taken care of, to only come back into the shop a few days later to find that him and Gloria had tore that thing all the way back down just so Gary could replace a piece of felt that nobody would ever see for years to come. I'll just be honest, that used to drive me a little crazy, but I get that. He was very detailed, but that just summed him up. That's how he did things. He would always go the extra mile to make things as good as possible for the customer. And certainly last but not least, and certainly in this church setting, I'm reminded of Scripture when thinking of how Gary lived his life. Colossians 3:23, "And whatever you do, Do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. If you were a friend or family of Gary, he was all in. In all the years I knew him, I never heard him say a criticizing word, or he would never raise his voice or be critical of any work that we were doing. He would oftentimes tell me if I had done something wrong, though, Brian, why don't we just try this? And I knew what that meant. But he was always very, very supportive. I would also watch with envy how he would support his family and especially his grandson, Braden, as you may have read in the bulletin, but with the different projects that they would be involved in. Although Gary and I never talked a whole lot about religion, I knew his heart from the way he lived. I miss Gary very much, as I know many of you do, but I know there will come a day when we will see him again. Thank you very much.
Yes. Gary dedicated himself to helping piano students with the tuning and the maintenance and the rebuilding of their instruments. And when Josiah and his family were shopping for a piano, Gary was available on the other side of a FaceTime call or a text, and he advised us, was it a good instrument or should we pass on it? So I really appreciate Josiah is here to represent all the students that Gary helped.
My name is Brian Lynch, and I also make my living working on pianos, largely due to Gary Stewart. And I have notes with me, and I'm going to need these because if I don't use them, one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to stand, stare, and stutter, or I'm going to talk into the evening, neither of which adds anything to this celebration, so I'm going to use them. I went to school to be a piano technician, but I've tried to imagine a scenario in which I would actually be working on pianos today if it weren't for spending some time under Gary's tutelage. And I honestly can't imagine that scenario. All of the comments that Brian made earlier about Gary, I fully echo. But even more than that for me, it was, I have a voice inside of me that's a big critic, and some of you may be able to relate to that. And to this day, Gary's voice is the counter to that. He would say, Brian, you're a fast learner. Brian, you reason through troubleshooting really well, and that type of a thing. And so to this day, when I'm doubting myself and I'm in the middle of a job, I can almost hear Gary. And so I'm going to do what I promised and stick with the notes. So Gary was a trusted mentor and a dear friend to me. And I'm sure you'd love to hear more of this beautiful music sooner rather than later, so I'm going to honor that by being brief. Because I do take care of pianos for a living, I'm reminded of Gary in some way every single day. And whether it's a repair technique that I learned from him, or because I'm looking at a model of piano that he was particularly fond of, or maybe not so fond of, I find myself reminiscing often about him and wishing that he was still with us. And this past week, it was particularly true. And what is a fairly recent development for me, these are also necessary. This past week, I received a call to take care of an old upright piano that had a very old pneumatic player installed in it. The player mechanism played those old paper rolls, and it was quite a behemoth with gears and tubes, cogs and chains filling essentially every square inch of the cabinet. It was in dire need of tuning, and there were a couple of minor issues with the player as well. Now, troubleshooting and fixing ancient player mechanisms is not on the curriculum, in case you're wondering, in a piano technician school. So I immediately began to be nervous and felt like I might be in over my head on this job. And just as I was thinking to myself, man, I wish Gary was here, the piano's owner began to explain that he'd not been able to reach anyone at the first technician's number that he'd been given, and that after doing some cross-referencing, he discovered that this technician had recently passed. After confirming that this was, in fact, Gary Stewart, I did something I've never done before. I asked him to pull up the chair that was next to the piano, and I said, "Let me tell you about Gary Stewart." To make a long story short, I talked much longer than I intended. I assured him that Gary would have loved his piano and that he would absolutely have been the man for the job. He earnestly thanked me later for sharing and said that I had turned what had been a name and an obituary to him into someone he felt like he knew and wished that he had. Thankfully, also due to Gary, I was able to reason my way through the issues with the piano and successfully tune it as well. I have this next part. I wrote these words shortly after Gary passed, and I had no intention of simply recycling them here, but when I went back and read through it, it resonated so deeply with me yet again, and I got emotional again, that I just decided to share them with you, and so that's what I'm going to do. I have very few regrets when it comes to my friendship with Gary, but I do have a few. I wish that I'd met him many years sooner than I did. And even more so, I wish that we had many years still left. I wish that I'd hung around longer all those evenings at his shop when I was training instead of hurrying off at the end of the day. I wish I had dropped everything to go tune his Fisher Grand when he texted me a few days before he passed, instead of scheduling it for a date that we never saw. I wish I had stopped in for a visit with Gary and Charlotte each of the many times that it crossed my mind after Parkinson's forced him into early retirement. And most of all, I wish I had taken the time when I was in their home in February to tell Gary that I loved him and how much he meant to me personally. But I'm also grateful. I'm grateful that I got to spend several days with him in February, not knowing it would be the last. I'm grateful for the best mentor that an inspiring piano technician could have ever hoped to have learned from. His well of wisdom was deep and often had nothing at all to do with pianos, as I think Brian alluded to earlier. I'm grateful that what I do for a living will remind me of my friend every single day. There are no words to adequately describe Gary if you didn't know him, and certainly no one word. But if I had to pick two, the two that come to mind for me are brilliant and kind. And I know I see smiles across this room because I think that resonates with you as well. Gary was almost always the smartest man in the room, and yet you'd feel leaving better about yourself. He had an inventor's mind and a servant's heart. Soft-spoken and sharp-witted, determined and gentle, his uniquely balanced character left an immediate impression on the mind and an indelible mark on the heart. I could go on, but I promised to get us back to the music quickly, and I can't think of a more perfect way to honor Gary than what we're experiencing here today. He would absolutely have loved this. And though I don't pretend to have all the particulars sorted with regard to how our world interfaces with the one that awaits us, a part of me believes he is loving it. And if that be the case, and no doubt he is doing so in the company of his dad, Ralph. Thank you.
Hello, it says in your bulletin that Larry Dodd is the music minister at First Presbyterian John City, and that is true. I'm not him, but he cannot be with us. So I stepped in for him, and we're glad that we can be here and be a part of this special music tribute.
My name is Pat Flanagan. I'm the music director, choir director here at First Presbyterian Bristol, and we are thrilled that you came out. I'm impressed that you're here, considering all the road construction or the blockage because of Rhythm and Roots. I'm amazed that you got here and you were here on time, so give yourself a hand for that. That was wonderful. We were thrilled that Jerry contacted us and asked if we would host this program, and I wasn't supposed to be here, or I would have been more involved, and I'm glad my plans changed and I've been able to sit back. I've had very little responsibility, but I've gotten to enjoy the whole program, and it's been wonderful. So thank you all for being here. I knew Gary for 30 years, and maybe longer, I don't know. I can tell lots of stories, but we've been here long enough, and you want to hear music. So thanks to David for stepping in at the last minute to conduct this choir. Very good. Thank you so much.